Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Change on the Run podcast, where we discuss common change challenges and ways you can address them when you're short of time. I'm your host, Phil Buckley. Today's topic is not taking things personally. It's easy to take things to heart when working on a change initiative. The environment makes it easy to do so. It's fast-paced, deadline-driven, and moving forward often requires multiple approvals, not to mention that circumstances constantly change. But when you take things personally, you're not at your best, and often you're at your worst. So, how do you separate content from emotions and avoid the knee-jerk responses and regrettable behaviors triggered by your perceptions? My guest today is Paul Marchildon. Paul, welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here, Phil.
So great to have you on the show. Paul is a branding consultant, motivational speaker, and author of Leisurology, a guide to a new, better work ethic. He helps companies drive revenue growth through human engagement and genuine collaboration, which both seem like foundations for today's topic. Paul, what's been your experience with not taking things personally?
I don't know about you, but for me, I actually had a time where I believed that taking things personally was a virtue. Like I actually thought, yeah. I put so much heart of myself into it that, it was really important that I got things right. But I've really come to believe that taking things personally is really selfish. It's really, taking it to yourself and not being aware of the people and environment around you. I've had some great help through books like, are you familiar with the 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz? One of the 4 agreements is don't take anything personally. And his notion there is that, nothing others do is because of you. It's the notion that what others say and do is a projection of their own reality. So if you're able to sort of immune yourself to that, then you'll have less suffering in your life.
Wow, that's really interesting. We met like 20 years ago and when you were running your very successful agency, Atlantis Creative Group, and you were fearless, is all about creating environments and experiences where teams could excel and potentially punch above their weight. But in order to do that, you went into territory that was so new at the time where you got a lot of tension from, I think, suppliers and whatever to try and stretch it. If you did take it personally way back then, what were the negative results or what were the negative impacts of taking things personally?
Well, I learned early in my career that taking things personally is a surefire way of failure. The notion, one of the best examples I can give you is we were always pitching creative to clients. And usually we would go in with 3 ideas. And on the way in, my account directors would say, Paul, which idea do you think is the best idea? And I would say to them, the best idea is the idea the client likes. And the reason why they asked that is because we'd often be 3 of us and we'd each take one of the ideas and became a bit of an internal competition amongst us of who did the best presentation of the idea. But it wasn't about that. It was really, who did the best job of conveying the idea, not who actually got won the idea. So really at the end of the day, it was about, engaging the client. And if a client didn't like an idea, you had to be really okay with that because what they're doing is they're telling you what they do like. And so you start to listen to them and run with them and get into their space and not be stuck in your space about what you're attached to.
And I imagine that takes a lot of learning and over your career. And what made you flip the switch? Was it, the books that you'd read or, from I taking everything personally because I'm a passionate business person that really wants to drive to success? What flipped that switch for you?
Couple things. One is parenthood. So, I have a child that suffers from anxiety, and they were in grade 6 and they're at their locker and their bestie came storming out of classroom and they said, hey, Chloe, how are you? And they just kept walking right by them, didn't even make eye contact and was really distraught. And my son was crushed. He was like crying, thinking, what did I do? Why was she so upset with me? And what am I going to do now? As it turns out, it had nothing to do with him. The girl had just been reprimanded by the teacher. and was so, upset that she just had to go somewhere and be alone. And yet my son automatically assumed that it was about him. So there's, lessons that you get from your children that you think about in your own life about not taking it personally. And then I think of a great leader. So I don't know if you've ever worked with Frank Stronach, the founder of Magna, one of the wealthiest Canadians, ever, and built this unbelievable empire and was a client of mine. And I mostly dealt with his daughter, Belinda Stronach, but occasionally, I remember one time Belinda said, "My father would like to speak to you privately." I thought, wow, that's exciting. And I'd only just launched Atlantis, and I get in there, and as it turns out, Frank wants to hire me, but hire me, on his team and individually. Yet I just launched this business. And Frank said to me, he invited me to join him. And I was young, and I said to Frank, if you can believe this, I said, "Well, I don't think you can afford me."
I've always wanted to say that, but I never felt like I could.
Frank took a moment. He tilted his glasses down and he looked at me and he said, "Excuse me?" No, it wasn't kind of an ego thing or whatever, but he was just genuinely curious. He's looking at me. He's like, "I can't believe this kid just said to me that I can't afford him." And I realized what I had said. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, that came out wrong. What I meant to say is the job that you want to hire me for, the amount that would be reasonable to pay for that is far less than I'm projecting to earn with my new agency that I've launched." And he asked me a whole bunch of more questions. He was very curious about that. And he looked at me, he's like, "I could see why you would want to continue with that." And it turns out I ended up being his agency on a project for years and years after that. So that was a big win. And what I would have learned from him is he didn't take that personally, because the way it came out, it was really bad.
Well, we'll do another course on what not to say to very influential business leaders.
So the real takeaway on that experience was that Frank was curious. He asked more questions, and he didn't take it personally.
Wow, that's an excellent example and great learning for you. And so how do you develop that mindset? Because I know in your book and a lot of your courses and teachings, it is about mindset, and you're very connected with body, mind, and soul. And how do you set up a mindset when you are in a sort of a pressure cooker environment of a change initiative, or essentially all of your clients are going through a massive transformation? How do you prepare yourself mentally so you don't fall into the "I've taken it personally" and react in kind?
Right. Well, I can say that the answer isn't an overnight solution. It's a practice. And meditation, I highly recommend, because what meditation does is it really gets you into a much more mindful space. It allows you to put that pause in before reacting. So where you respond as opposed to react. And there's this cute little, back to kids, there's this cute little thing that you could Google called Be the Pond. And it's a program called Cosmic Kids, and it's for children. It's 5 minutes long, and it's about mindfulness. And the gist of it is that there's this pond, and there's all these fish, and there's an anxious fish, and there's an angry fish, and there's a happy fish, and a sad fish, and a tired fish, and a hungry fish. And your job is not to be any of those fish. Your job is to be the pond and to observe all those fish. So those things that are going on inside of your head that, you're starting to, assumptions and feelings, your job is to step back and just observe that and then work with that and realize what's going on. So it's just removing yourself from being being the fish.
Fascinating. And it reminds me of sort of negative self-talk, which, I think is one of those tenets of mindfulness. And just what travels through your mind isn't necessarily true, but it's independent thoughts, and you can choose what to do with them or not.
Right.
How do you manage those, given everyone has them? But I would imagine success is how you interpret them, just like the pond and the fish. How do you turn it into, I realize this theoretically and I'm able to do it practically?
Right. Well, I have a few steps that I use. One is I actually call it step 0, because I had a step 1 and step 2. And I realized there's something that comes before that. So step 0 for me is relax and let go. And those are actually 2 parts, because the relax is just kind of take a breath. And then let go is letting go of any ideas, anything you're attached to. And that's really to open your mind to really be open to what the person is about to say or share. So relax and let go. And then step one is to connect. And I mean, really connect. Is if you've been able to relax and let go of the ideas, then you can be really with the person that you're talking with. And then, of course, step two is ask questions. That's back to the be curious, like framework. And that allows you to be in a place where you're really open and you're not taking it personally. You're not attaching prejudice ideas that you've already had in your head. You're really sitting there open to whatever it is that the other person is sharing. And that way you won't be hurt or disappointed, or you won't take it personally.
Do you ever forget? And it's a great process of how to get things ready. And I'm just so conscious of so many people going through large changes. And again, they come in with, ways and tools to make them sort of be that neutral self going forward. But then, they had 4 hours sleep and the kids were up all night and they've got a 7:00 Zoom meeting and they're doing the big pitch where they might not go to their best process because they're kind of surviving. Do you ever fall into that, or have you kind of moved beyond that sort of, I'm just trying to survive and get through this moment?
I wish I could say I've moved beyond. I forget all the time. You think about, God, can you imagine the stamina of like an Olympic athlete that is like a figure skater as an example, and they're going for the gold and they have a fall and they get right back up. And I guess what they've been trained to do is like, you just let that go. And now you're still going for the gold because it's possible, and it is possible to get the gold even though you had a fall. So my trick is to stop back and say, wow, I just messed up. I really took that personally just now. That's interesting. And then you regroup and you step zero again and you relax and you let go and you just get back on your horse, Well,
that's great. And I'm wondering, you do so much work with teams and set them up to be high performing teams, and the whole notion of extreme collaboration and information sharing. How do you set a team up to have almost a communal view of, not taking things personally? Because individually you can be that one person, but if you're in a team of 30, how do you prepare them to get closer to that as a cohesive unit?
The number one best way is, first of all, to role model it. So is to do it and to be accountable. So when you actually mess up, you point it out to them. You show like, wow, I just took that personally. And so then they see like, okay, I get that. I saw that happen, even on a small scale. And then you allow people, you make it a safe place to mess up. So you allow people to give permission to each other to give them feedback when they're taking it personally. And that takes some practice for sure, because people, are stuck on taking it personally in many places. So it becomes a practice. But when you get a group doing it and you see people doing it well, all of a sudden you feel like, oh, that person was just really vulnerable. Now I feel like I can be more vulnerable. And it works. You
set up a team, you start seeing it through role modeling, and it's 6 months down the line and they're gearing up for, a major sort of launch of a new software program or a merger, and people are starting to forget and they are starting to take it personally and as slights, and let's say speaking with their friends about how they feel, not respected. How do you move those people back to what they did so well, perhaps when it wasn't as time sensitive, into that positive space when they've fallen into the hole of that natural default to taking things personally?
People need to go through the grieving process of whatever it is that they're letting go. So, there's a whole 5 steps to grieving, and you have to make room for that. So if somebody, has something, they need to get that laundry out, like air it out. But through that, I think that people can kind of start to step back and see, oh, I'm not alone in this. Other people feeling this way. And it's not just about me, and that everybody's in this boat. And so I think dialogue, there again, it's being curious. It's really asking questions, and on both sides of the party.
I wonder, different organizations react differently, and, the culture of an organization can often drive behaviors, and whether it is, more combative or competitive or collaborative. Do you have any stories about, perhaps 2 different companies that had different cultures and how that led to how people related to each other, given their different views on topics? Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, there's a glaring one that comes to mind. I won't name them, but let's just say they're a telecommunications company. And the culture there was so combative and the furthest thing from mindfulness, where they were so attached to their devices. And by virtue, I mean, the technology is anti-connectivity, in my opinion. And so it actually created people who were less mindful and less connected to their peers. And so when you're not connected, you're not even aware that you're inflicting harm on others. I stumbled across a contract with them, but I decided to not pursue any working with them after, because it was from the top down and there was no appetite for change. I couldn't work with them.
It fascinates me because, you see a culture, you come in, it's the one that you described. Did you try to move the culture? And then what that people said, hey, thanks, Paul, but we're really happy the way we are. And we, this is what makes us who we are. Did you try and kind of poke it a little bit or broaden it a bit?
How many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? Just one, but the light bulb really needs to want to change. One of the things I've, gotten wise to is, don't offer your support where it's not welcome. I have gifts to offer them, but they're not receiving. So they haven't step zeroed. They haven't relaxed and let go of the ideas that they have. So I can't go there.
I've come across a similar situation, and I used to think, or I had the mindset that if I could move them 5%, then I was doing good and I would take the assignments. And what I realize now is that 5% isn't much. And again, once you leave, the 5% goes away, and almost that you can give people false hope that a culture will change, but you see all the signs that it's not going to be with that leadership. And so perhaps exiting is the best thing to do. And any comments about that?
Well, I would need to see radical desire for change, and it would have to be at the CEO level. If you don't have the buy-in right at the top for any kind of culture change, then, I don't think you're going to have success.
I have seen it though, where there has been such a fundamental shift at the top. It's rare, but it does happen. How about on the positive side of things, where you go in and you're working with a client, they're keen to become more collaborative. They're keen to take on new behaviors at the top that are role modeled. Have you ever had sort of the delight of working with a client like that?
Absolutely. I would have to say that they already had some level of that openness. It might have been a new area that they were, a new problem that had been identified that they weren't aware of. And then they started to see, wow, that is a big problem. And they were open to change in that area. And then, classic would be diversity. But I'm thinking way back into the 90s when diversity became a thing. And I was really impressed. I'm happy to name the company. It was Warren Lambert. I was like, wow, they were really spectacularly advanced in how they address diversity in the workplace.
No, that's excellent. And what do you do, say, if someone takes something personally that you say or that you did, and you're seeing all the signs of, emotional outbursts or, change in mood or all those indications that things aren't quite right. How would you recommend that the listeners should deal? It's clear when someone's not kind of connecting the way they usually did, and all roads point to they've taken something personal that you've done or said. How do you address it, knowing that in their mind, you're the perpetrator?
Right. Well, the first thing is I maintain strong self-esteem. So I hold myself internally that I still feel good about myself. And then I think I really become accountable to them, because I have a belief that communication is the responsibility of the communicator. So although I might have meant something entirely different, maybe even the opposite of how they interpreted it, however I said it, they interpreted it that way. So that's where I become accountable for, and ask them how they felt about what I said. And then I start to say it differently and say, what if I said it like this? Would this be more meaningful to you? Would you be less, confronted by it? That sort of thing.
Do you apologize or not? Do you say, sorry for you taking it that way, or do you leave it?
I don't apologize for my idea. I apologize for the way I communicated it.
Have you ever had the circumstance where, the person has taken something in a different way and they've taken it personally? You go up to them and said, hey, I just want to check in. Are you okay? And they go, no, I'm perfectly fine. Thanks. No, that's great. But they're not. The body language is there, but they're not in a space where they want to share it or whatever, what do you do then? And I
That's
don't know the answer to that question, so that's why I'm asking you.
That is a tough one. I think what you want to leave is the impression that you are really open and safe to speak to about whatever idea they have, or whatever feelings they have. So you leave room for them to communicate when they're ready to communicate. And safety is the factor. It's like you got a step zero. You have to not be in a persuasive way. You have to really show that you're really open to whatever it is that they're feeling and they've taken away, and that you're ready to be accountable for whatever. And then it's up to them if they want to make a move or not.
No, good. Well said. Thank you. And in your book, you have a quote. It's great to read again. And it says, all work and no play makes no sense. And again, in change, the environment can be night and day. It can be, you can't take holidays at this time or whatever, lots of long hours. It almost goes against sort of that inspiration of leisureology and, how you can create greater productivity when you make room and space for doing things other than work. What's your comment about that? Like, how do you build in sort of space when that environment is so much, keep working, keep working, keep working?
Right. Well, it goes back to your belief system. And, I'm striving to be at 100% leisure. And that doesn't mean that I don't work. Work and leisure are both a state of mind. And, if you're really loving what you're doing, then you're in a state of leisure. So your work can be leisure. So I think, and I don't believe in this, I don't like the term work-leisure balance because it sounds like they're two separate things. I like the term work-leisure integration. So for instance, after I'm done this, I plan to go down to the beach for a little bit. And when I'm down there, I'll be thinking about, possibly what's going on the beach, but I might also be thinking about my next creative project. So it's really about making space, knowing what your goals and objectives are, and then doing them whenever you want.
So how do you build in that space, whether it's mentally or physically, where people can take that extra time to kind of ground themselves and sort of be at their best when the environment is sort of pushing them to more sort of ongoing, step-by-step change? Or
Well, I always go back to checking in with your belief system. There's still so many people that believe that working harder and longer hours is more productive and efficient and effective, which the research will show you that it's not. That it's far better for somebody to leave at 5 o'clock at night and come in fresh and tackle a problem again in the morning than it is for them to keep working.
If there was like one thing you could do to make sure that you don't take things personally, what would that be?
So the one thing I think is the be the pond. It's really take the moment to step back, relax, and have a look around. Remove yourself from the heat of the moment. And that's sometimes really hard to do because, a boss could be right in your face about something and it's intense. But I always think back to the Dalai Lama. If a terrorist came up to the Dalai Lama and stuck a gun to the Dalai Lama's head, the Dalai Lama would probably look at them and say, "Wow, that's interesting. Son, what's going through your mind right now?" And I bet you in minutes, the gun would be down and the person would be sitting beside the Dalai Lama cross-legged having a wonderful conversation. So if you be the pond, I think you really diffuse the situation. You'll find that the other person will take on your Zen and you'll be able to get to a resolution much more quickly.
Wow, great advice. And from my perspective, the one thing is as you've mentioned, take a look at the big picture and really trying to get into, the empathy of getting into someone else's shoes. Years ago, I would take things personally and I was only thinking of myself and not thinking of what the other person was going through. And I find when you do that now, they've got their stresses. Everybody's fearful about something and almost giving them a little bit of room themselves and not looking at it internally from your perspective can help you then check in and have a good discussion and move forward. Paul, this has been great. I'm wondering, is there one last sort of point, whether it's a watch out or a piece of advice or an insight that you could share with the listeners just on not taking things personally?
Right. Well, I think the best thing that you can do is master it yourself. And once you have, then teach others. Because be the change you want to see in the world, and then hopefully bring that to others so that more of us will not take it personally.
Fantastic. Excellent advice. Thank you so much. So Paul, thank you so much for being on the Change on the Run podcast. I really appreciate you sharing your perspectives and your advice going forward. So how can people get in contact with you?
The best way to get in touch with me is LinkedIn, so Paul Marchildon. And then, of course, my email address, and you're all welcome to email me at any time. I love your input, is paul@whatisleisure.com.
Fantastic. Thank you. We'll put it in the notes as well. Thanks again. And I'd also like to thank our producer, Charlie Buckley, and thank you for listening. And if you have any questions or comments, please email me at phil@changewithconfidence.com. For upcoming episodes, please subscribe to the Change on the Run podcast, and please write a review if you've got the time. And until the next time, I wish you the best as you continue to lead change.